Okay.
All right. Well, let's get started. I'm Matthew Pancook. I'm the director here at Stewart County Community College Area Technical School Library, and this is our first lunch in the library for the 2013-2014 academic year. So welcome. Today's presentation is A Photographer's Work in the Work of Western Kansas by Jim Hoy. And this presentation is brought to you by the Kansas Humanities Council, a nonprofit organization promoting understanding of the history and ideas that shape our lives and strengthen our sense of community. So that we may all enjoy the program, please take a moment to turn off your cell phones or put them on vibrate. So, and then some of you who have got a little flyer about Jim, I'll just go ahead and touch real quick on what it probably already says in your flyer. Jim Hoy received his PhD in medieval English literature from the University of Missouri at Columbia, and he's currently a professor of English and the director of the Center for Great Plains Studies at Emporia State University. He's published 12 books and over 100 articles, and he's the co-author of Plains Folk, a syndicated newspaper column. Jim is also part of the Kansas Historical History Humanities Council, Kansas Humanities Council's reading program. So, and he's also been a charter member of the Kansas Humanities Council Speakers Bureau since 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, Jim Hoy.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a Speakers Bureau program from the Kansas Humanities Council, and it's about this man you see on the screen there, Francis Marion Steele, who's active in this part of the state back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was born in 1866, I think just close to St. Louis, Missouri, just across the line. His father died when he was very young. His mother took a job as a housekeeper for a minister in Missouri. At age 14, he was working for a photographer in Kansas City. And in 1890, he shows up in Dodge City and acquires a horse and buggy and mounts a big boxy thing with his camera equipment on it. He used glass plates to take his photographs and headed out into the southwestern Kansas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Texas Panhandle, southeast Colorado area to take photographs of cowboys at work out on the open range. Yeah, this picture is out of the Big Basin area, St. Jacobs Well, there in western Clark County. It's pretty typical of many of his pictures. He really knew how to frame a picture, how to compose a picture. Most of his photographs have a human in it. Not all, but most. He considered himself an artist, not a documentarian, but his great value today is how he documented life in this area back at that time period. And when the open range closed and they began to plow up the range and plant wheat, how he documented that change from ranching to crop agriculture, and then small town life, various construction projects, things like that. But his work today is greatly valued for that. This picture here was taken on the Grimes Ranch in Clark County, and it shows all the elements necessary for the, would you see if they could cut these lights out here? It might help them a little bit. Yeah. All the elements necessary for a trail drive from Texas to Kansas in the old days. You got the cattle in the background, and you have the remuda, the horse herd in the foreground, and a couple of chuck wagons there in the midground. This is actually on a roundup down in that area. It says this is titled Outlaw Steer, and he titled Outlaw Steer, and he must be a pretty bad steer. They got 4 ropes on him, and all those ropes are tight. Notice also down in this corner, copyright by F.M. Steele. His name, he put his name on many of his photographs, or sometimes on the frame around the photograph. It's not always there, but it is many times. Interestingly, sometimes it's S-T-E-E-L, sometimes it's S-T-E-E-L-E. It's real. His name was spelled with an E, final E, but it doesn't always get that final E doesn't always make it to his photographs. This one he called dehorning a bull. I believe this one is down in the Texas Panhandle. I like to call this one, how many cowboys does it take to dehorn the bull? And actually it takes one or two on the ground and one or two on the horses, but what he was doing was getting those other cowboys lined up there. He can sell more photographs that way. He was an itinerant photographer from what I can tell, and made money in that early period by photographing cowboys on the range and then trying to sell them photographs. Just as many times, if you live in the country, somebody will knock on your door and they're representing an airplane pilot who has taken a photograph of your homestead, your ranch stead or whatever, and is trying to sell you a photograph. And he did that. We know that happened because, or I think we can deduce that happened because 25 of his photographs ended up in Greenwood County in the Flint Hills. I don't know why, but 3 of them ended up near Fort Scott, a little town called Kincaid. And they're held at the Pittsburgh State University Library there, and I always kind of wondered how in the world they get back there, but found out that the man that had those photographs was from Kincaid, Kansas, lived on a farm there. When he was a young boy, or young man, in his late teens, early 20s, he worked on a ranch in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and Steele shows up, takes the photos, he buys 2 or 3 of them, and then he goes back home, spends the rest of his life back in Bourbon County, and he took those photos with him. So he's out there selling photos to cowboys, and later on people would commission him to photograph their ranch, their farm, their house, various things like that. A couple of cowboys got a steer roped out there, a heifer roped out there in Ashland in Park County. And here's a nice photograph around the chuck wagon. He took a lot of chuck wagon photographs. That's where cowboys would congregate at mealtime, and it not only documents what chuck wagon life was like, but it also more chances to sell those photos. So we see the bedrolls here, we see the chuck wagon, we see the horse herd being held behind that rope barrier, that little temporary corral made by Larry rope. You can see it maybe across the horses, across their chest there. Yeah. Notice that these cowboys, the genuine thing, don't look much like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood, but this shows us what they actually wore, the kind of clothing they wore, the kind of equipment they used, what a chuck wagon, how a chuck wagon was outfitted. Very well documented the lifestyle. This is down the Texas Panhandle. They're catching some horses. You notice there they tie one end of that rope to a chuck wagon wheel, string some others around there. Notice the rope is so low that those horses could easily just step over it, but they're trained well enough, they've done it often enough that they stay where they're supposed to until they get the one caught that they want, being saddled up there in the morning. This one is southwest Kansas, I'm not quite sure where. Notice the eggshells lying around there. I assume this is mainly breakfast time. I particularly like this photo. You can see the chuck box here very nicely. You can see what that's like, but I want you to look at this horse here especially. My son and his wife run the Flying W Ranch in Chase County. It's a 7,000-acre cattle ranch, and they also do agritourism, but a few years, he's a good cook. My son's a good cook. He decided he wanted to get involved in these chuck wagon cooking contests, so he bought a chuck wagon that had gone from Texas to North Platte, Nebraska in 1880, 80-something, and outfitted it and went down to Winfield, Kansas. They had about a dozen to 15 chuck wagons from Kansas and Oklahoma, a couple from Texas in the contest. Gave them all the same ingredients, they cooked them up, and then they judge them. They had their wagon there, they judge them on the authenticity of the wagon and the cooking. He came in last. They said his cooking was good, but his wagon wasn't authentic because he didn't have the lanterns there. But, you know, it's 10 in the morning. And you know, out on the range, as soon as it got light enough, they blew out the lantern. They weren't going to let it waste fuel oil during the daytime. But the thing they got on him for was he had his saddle horse tied to the front wheel of the wagon. And you might not be able to see it there, but this horse has a rope loop down here going up the front wheel of the wagon. And they told him nobody would ever do that in the old days. jerked the wagon, and so they graded him down. He's never entered another one that kind of soured him on it. He's still a good cook though. But in his biography by Javatelli, he tells about Goodnight. Whenever he'd be out with the cowboys overnight, he always tied his horse to the front wheel of the chuck wagon so that he'd have him handy if he needed him. And Haley records one episode when the cattle jumped and stampeded and ran past the wagon, and his horse jerked, and it jerked the wagon around but didn't do any bad damage. Goodnight steps on his horse and he's after the cattle right away. So what those judges didn't know was that the inventor of the chuck wagon used it also as a hitching post. This picture was taken near here. It might have been in Seward County. Cowboys taking a bath at the end of the day in a stream with their horse. The horse is right in there in the water with them. I hadn't paid that much attention, but at Emporia State University where I teach, recently retired art professor Larry Squarm from Greensburg, a nationally photographer with a nice reputation. We had him do a presentation on the artistry of Steele's work, and he pointed out something I'd not thought about in this picture. I was just always taking the horse in there with the guys. He said he wondered how in the world did Steele talk these 5 guys into stripping, going skinny dipping, with an audience sitting here and up here on the horses watching it. And I don't know whether that was part of it or not, but it's kind of an interesting idea. This is a very famous one of his photographs. It appears on postcards. It appears in books and articles about the Old West. It might not be the only nighttime photograph of a trail drive, but it's the only one that I know of. In the 1890s, Steele was photographing the cowboys from the 3-block ranch in New Mexico who were trailing, I've read, 5,000 cattle, 5,000 steers to Sterling, Kansas, and he took this nighttime photo. How he did it, what his equipment was, I'm not sure, but you see that he called it changing of the guard, and you see these guys here pulling off their boots, and these guys here pulling off their boots, getting ready to go to bed. These guys here being roused from their sleeping bags, from their bedrolls, to go take their turn on night guard. That's not really what was happening, because you see these other people standing around. There's a guy on a horse in the background here, but he had that pose to replicate that event that would take place several times a night on every trail drive that ever went from Texas to Kansas and beyond. And as I say, as far as I know, it's the only one ever taken at night of a trail drive. And as is typical of many of his photographs, when it appears in books and articles, he's not given credit. That's one reason that my wife and I got involved in this study. We think this Kansas photographer, who is, I think, every bit as good as Irwin E. Smith from Texas and L.A. Huckman from Montana in photographing cowboy life, deserves some recognition. When we started our project of digitizing as many Steele photos as we could, the 58 that we had to start with were the ones held in the Berryman collection in Clark County and in the State Historical Society in Topeka. We have now, we don't collect the actual photos, we just scan them and put them online. Around 500, we're up to that right now. This one was taken at Ashland. This cowboy here, leaning against this board, Leslie Dakin, was thrown from his horse. They thought he was dead. He wasn't. And I guess he was back on his horse shortly thereafter. But whenever you're out on a ranch doing work and somebody is thrown from a horse, gets hurt, some kind of accident, the work stops, the other cowboys gather around to try to help. And in this instance, Steele drove his buggy up to see what was going on. When he found out the guy was going to be all right, I assume he set up his camera and took the picture. But this is his buggy, and there you can see part of the box where he kept his photographic equipment as he traveled around out there in the countryside. This is on what was originally known as the Pigpen Ranch in Grant County near Ulysses. The owner of that ranch right here was a open range cowboy, later bought the ranch, Barney O'Connor. It's called the BOC Ranch. Now notice that Steele has set up a thing here that says FM Steele, photographic specialist, Hutchinson, Kansas. He had a studio in Hutchinson at that time. He had studios in Meade and in Ashland and in Dodge and in I think it was El Reno. He had 15 or 18 towns in Oklahoma Panhandle, southwest Kansas. He had a studio. Whether he was there full time or whether he would go and be there for a couple of weeks, rent rooms and take pictures, I'm not sure. But he was hired by Barney O'Connor, this guy right here, to come out and take photos of his ranch. And we have several, of the chuck wagon and the cattle and the horses and the house, the barn. He lined all of his cowboys up here and had the photo taken. He had Steele catch a train from Hutchinson to Dodge, went up to Dodge to get him. This was in the teens. The man that gave me this picture, his grandfather had worked on the Barney O'Connor's ranch, and he said of this particular picture, this is the foreman, this is the owner. The foreman's pretty irritated because when O'Connor picked up Steele, this is during Prohibition, but he also picked up some bootleg whiskey, brought it out when he was ranch. All the cowboys imbibed heavily, and when Steele left, everyone else was too drunk to do any work, and the foreman had to do all the wrap-up work that day, I guess. Anyway, we know that he was hired, commissioned to come out and take pictures of ranches. That's what he was doing here. This picture, good illustration, I think, of I think this is from Haskell County, if I remember correctly, of the transition from open range to fencing. Notice the cattle are a little better quality than the old longhorns. They got eating at a feed buck. Here's this cowboy. He can't sing, don't fence me in. He is fenced in. And we see that nice transitional period. We also see that transition from horsepower to automotive power. Another Haskell County photograph. You got the cattle in the background, the pens here, cowboys on the horses, and the bankers and the owners, I suppose, in the automobile there. But photographs showing the transition. This is a bull named Columbus from the Frank Rockefeller Ranch in Kiowa County. A bull weighed 2,200 pounds, cost $5,000. It's back at that time expensive. The man that gave me these pictures, let me take these pictures, was living on that ranch at the time. I don't know if he still is or not. Dick Robbins. He's a longhorn breeder now. But that's pictures of that Hereford when they switched. And then we get that change from the open range to plowed up wheat fields. This picture, another one we got from Haskell County. It's a very graphic illustration of what happened. And look at that. 11 shares on that plow. 11 turning over that native buffalo grass 11 rows at a time, 11 rows at a time, big old steam engine. Larry Schwarm also pointed out that most of his cowboy photographs cowboys are facing the camera. Many of his agricultural photographs are taken from behind, as if, you know, that other stuff's past now. This is, yeah. Anyway, a striking photograph that makes me sad to see. This one I have because somebody made himself a tractor. Got a Model T or something, and he's got some steel wheels on the back, and we got a picture here too, I think, showing, yeah, just 2 rows at a time, plowing up that grass 2 rows at a time. But the ingenuity, I think, of the Kansas farmer is what attracted me to this one, seeing a homemade tractor. We can follow wheat, the whole cycle of the growing of wheat. Here they're planting wheat. This guy got a big old steam engine there, steam tractor, and he's fastened together 4 horse-drawn drills, so it's probably is wider than these huge drills that they pull these $250,000 tractors out here now. So we're planning it, and notice also it's low till or no till. That's nothing new. They were doing it way back then. And then we get to harvest, whether you are using a header barge, making stacks of it, and then coming by with the engine, diesel engine, and the separator. You see the water tank here hauling water for the steam engine. And here we get a close-up of the engine itself and the running it through the thrashing machine, the separator. And when you finish, you get that big old one-way with your big old steam tractor and plow up, turn over that wheat stubble, and you're ready to plant again. Kind of go through the whole cycle of that. As I say, he documented very well, I think, the agricultural practices. They raised corn out here before they had circle irrigation. Notice the man standing here, pretty well hidden in the corn, big old tall corn. This is Haskell County. Two little girls, the Minor twins. Their father was a physician in a field of Capricorn. I hope to keep track of them because those girls would certainly get lost in there pretty easily. Big old Capricorn. Dr. Minor treated the first people who came down with flu, that great influenza epidemic that started in Haskell County, went to Fort Riley, Camp Weston, and then all over the whole world and killed millions of people. A first for Kansas, I don't think we need to be too proud of. Stacking hay, the old-fashioned way with a Jayhawk hay stacker and a Go Devil or hay buck to bring the loose hay up here to them. And notice this building here, we'll get to it again in a minute. Have a little produce farming, pretty nice cabbage being grown there. That picture came from Haskell County, as did this one. Notice his name again at the bottom here. This guy's out feeding his chickens. There's that building we saw. That was a sugar beet factory. Sugar beets were a big business here in southwest Kansas, eastern Colorado. And the company in Garden City apparently hired him to document their system and their production. We see here some irrigation ditches and some hoeing of the sugar beets. I was showing this picture in Garden City a few years ago, a couple, 3 years ago, and my wife's in the audience, sitting by a black woman, an old black woman, and she kind of muttered to herself, "They didn't give us hoes like that." And afterwards, Kathy asked her what she meant. She said her family worked for the sugar beet company, lived in a little 2-room shack there, and said the hose they gave us, the handles were about half that long. We either had to stoop way over or had to get down on our knees, less likely to accidentally chop off the sugar beet. But I noticed that we have one probably real worker here. I don't think the guy with the necktie on is probably out there to hoe, but he's out there to get his picture taken anyway. Notice the sugar beet also lying there on the edge. Notice the Mexican migrant workers harvesting the sugar beets. This same woman told my wife that the Mexican migrant workers thought we were rich because we had a house to live in. They had to sleep out in the open on the ground. Here's some of the office workers inside. Here they're hauling beets to the factory. Here's a railroad dump. And I never quite could figure this out, but then I met a man not too long ago who worked on the railroad, and he said that he used to, they could store those beets for a long time, I guess, out, and they would haul them in all winter long, from eastern Colorado, other parts of western Kansas, haul them in on train cars and then dump them there at the factory. So that's what's happening there. Interior view of the factory and the finished product. A lot of cavities sacked up there. And here we have again some hauling some of the beets in. And yeah, we see the factory back here, and the cattle here are being fed on the pulp after it's been, had the sugars out of it. So they're from that whole cycle of sugar beet production. The company evidently hired him to document their whole operation, outdoors and indoors. This is their office. Pretty fancy place. I have a feeling it was probably the most expensive house in Garden City at the time. Someone has said that that's now a bed and breakfast. I hope so. That means they preserved that house. And it certainly is a nice example of that fancy Victorian style. In addition to the agricultural work that he did, documenting his agricultural work, he also documented various construction projects. Here we have black teamsters hauling dirt for railroad construction. There you got some of the workers laying the ties. He has several photographs of railroad construction in Haskell County, and he was also hired by some company to document the building of a railroad in western Kansas into Colorado. Here they are, this guy on his slip, Fresno, picking up a load of dirt. I don't know if this is for the railroad, it could be for irrigation canals, because he also photographed a number of irrigation canal building projects and canals. And a lot of the irrigation projects, we got some from Garden City at the museum there, but most of our photographs of irrigation projects we got here from the museum in Liberal. When we began looking for photographs, we sent out letters of inquiry and various things like that, put letters in newspapers, and got a nice 60 or 70 or so from the museum in Haskell County, and about 80 or 100 here in Liberal, and about 60 or 80 in Garden City, nice big chunks of photographs. Now we're down to every once in a while somebody reads something on the internet and we get one. And yeah, I'm getting one here, not too, from another one from here. We got one off the internet last week from Nebraska. Anyway, I don't think these guys are actual railroad workers. They look a little too dressed up for me. I think what we might have here is that when they build a new bank building in Liberal, or if they build a new building here on campus, you'd have the president of the community college and maybe some board members and other people involved for the ceremonial turning of the first shovel of dirt, and then goes to the construction workers. Well, these people in their suits and ties, and the guy standing there watching them, I have a feeling this is a ceremonial photograph, not an actual workday photograph. So they probably had hired him to come out and document that. Here they're constructing a canal. I don't know if it's the Farmer's Ditch or the Amazon or which. I got that information back at the office, but not here. But building of canals, and when the water starts running through them, irrigation canals. Yeah, and an early irrigation project. There are 10 of these windmills in a circle around this big tank. See the circle there? Huge tank, which they filled with water to irrigate this field before they did that other stuff. This photograph in Garden City, someone hired him to photograph their nice new house, but instead of just getting all house, he frames that photograph so he's got the sidewalk running down this way and the trees there, a little statue thing with a bear out here in the front. This guy's house isn't quite so grand, but he's proud of it. And he has got his family, his son, daughter, wife, and their little house there. And Steele's taking a photograph of it for him. From Haskell County. These are called apparently farm or house portraits or farm portraits. And a photographic historian told me. And this guy documenting how well he's done out here in western Kansas, and at Christmas time he can send this photograph back to his relatives back east or back in Kansas City and show them how well he's doing. Got a nice two-story house, windmill with some water, so he has running water in the house. Got a silo, barn, with a little advertising on it, a shed, 1, 2, 3 teams of mules, and 2 automobiles. He's doing okay. And you can send that picture back and show everybody how prosperous life is out here in western Kansas. Here's a guy with his new house. See his storm cellar there, right behind it. And here he is the old house, the one he replaced. And the chickens running around, the windows out, the doors hanging kind of loose, sitting there. But look at the guy behind the rain barrel there. What's going on with that? I don't know. He's got this guy, his head's up there, sticking over the rain barrel. Steele had a sense of humor, and many of his photographs, he's got people pose in kind of interesting or humorous ways to, make a better picture, I guess.
Jim, I have a question about when these photos were taken. I recall.
Yeah, this is before the Depression.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe I should give a little more biography here as we go along. He came to Kansas in 1890, goes out in his buggy. He gets married in 1897, I believe, to a woman in Meade County, a woman named Pink Fletcher. 6 months later, they have a little daughter. She weighs 3 pounds. It was definitely a premature birth. About a year or so later, they have another daughter, and about a year later, they're divorced. Who wanted the divorce? How it happened, I don't know. But a couple of years after that, he remarries to a woman from Mullinville. They actually get married in Greensburg, or maybe he might have met her in Burton, in Reno County. But they stay married the rest of their lives. And they have a son. Steele's name was Francis Marion Steele. The son's name was Marion Francis Steele. Not been able to find out too much about him except that he was in the military and is buried at the National Cemetery in Leavenworth. But I've tried to determine whether he was married. If so, I'd like to see if there were any descendants to talk to, but they can't. The bureaucracy there says they can't give that information. It's confidential. Well, he's been dead for I don't know how many years. I don't think it's a lot, but I still can't find out for sure. Anyway, so yeah, and we'll get a little more biography a little later on, but he does have a second marriage, which does last. Here in Pueblo, Colorado, in 1921, they had a huge flood, and he took a bunch of photographs there. Just got a couple of samples here. You can see it was about as devastating as the ones they've had recently in Colorado, it looks like. But he took several photographs of that. Whether it was for the newspaper there, just why, I don't know, but he did. We have 3 photographs of American Indians that he took. This one of Cheyenne Arapaho Reservation. Not a very good photo, but since it's only one of 3 that we have, I wanted to show it to you. In 1927, he and his wife moved to McCook, Nebraska, and set up a studio there. He's at McCook for 8 years. The longest he's ever in one spot at one time is nearly as I've been able to find out. He has a studio in McCook, and a few years ago we learned of a man who knew him. This man is in his 80s. We drove up to McCook and interviewed him and talked to him, and he had some pretty interesting stories. He said, when I was a kid, I sent off box tops from Post Toasties or Raisin Bran or something and got a camera. I took my camera downtown to the studio and asked Mr. Steele to show me how to use it. And he says he did. He kind of liked me, and I kind of had me hang around. I did some work around the studio and that sort of thing. And he said every summer, Steele would go west of McCook about 20, 25, 30 miles to a place called Massacre Canyon, where in 1872, I believe it was, the Pawnee hunting party was jumped by their traditional enemy of the Sioux, and over 100 of them killed in ensuing battle. In the 1920s, that land is owned by some rancher there in Nebraska, and he would invite members of the Sioux tribe from the reservation in South Dakota, members of the Pawnee Reservation and reservation of Oklahoma, to come to Massacre Canyon, and he had a big picnic. And this guy that we talked to in Nebraska said every summer Steele went out there and took bunches of photographs, and he named some of the Indians who are pretty well known. He said when Steele moved back to Kansas, that was in 1935, Steele and his wife leave McCook and moved back to Dodge City. He said he gave me a couple of egg crates with the glass plates of those Indians in them. Now by egg crates, he means these things are about so big that it held, I don't know, 12 dozen eggs or more. A lot of photographs in there. This man said that I was in high school at the time. We moved into town, or we changed from our house to an apartment in town, didn't have room for those, so I hid them away in the basement of that house. Graduated from high school, went to the Navy a couple of years. When I came back, I went to the house to see if I could get those photos, those plates, glass plates, and the woman living there at the time said, oh yeah, let's go get them. They weren't there. Who knows what happened to them. But I've also been told that when Steele left Ashland to go to Nebraska, a few days after he had left town, his studio was in the second floor of the bank building in downtown Ashland. Someone had driven a wagon into the alley behind him and said he could hear the sound of breaking glass all over town. They were up there with a scoop shovel shoveling out glass plates and throwing them into that wagon, hauling them off to the dump. We have not found any original glass plates. We've seen some photos, I'm sure, were originally printed from those glass plates, but none of the glass plates themselves. Really sad. But those things are heavy. They take up a lot of space. I can understand why he didn't haul them around. All of them he'd ever taken with him around him. How many photos did he take? In the mid-1890s, there's an article in the Coldwater newspaper saying that F.M. Steele has gone back to a studio in Ashland after being in Comanche County for a week and a half, during which time, and he's finishing the photographs he took here, over 5,000. So if he took over 5,000 photos there in a week and a half, multiply that by the number of years he lived, then it's up there. It's a nice little picture, I think, of a little boy and his sister, and their dog and their horse, and the drink. I mean, it's just a really nice photo. Same little boy fishing in an irrigation ditch. I don't know if they're fishing irrigation ditches or not, but he's trying. This is one of the very few photos of Steele's that is just nature itself. This is in Beaver County, Oklahoma. I think he's out there for some reason, or he sees these two antelopes, snaps that picture, and they don't know he's there. But now they do. Well, they're looking at him, and I bet 2 seconds later they're over that hill and they're gone. This picture we got from Liberal, from your museum here. It's a great photograph. Some girl going off to school with a lunch bucket and books. But it's got to be a posed photo. What's she going to do when she hits the end of that log and got 3 foot of bank to crawl up, you know? It's a great photograph, but it's not really realistic, I think. So I like the photo. There we go. This is Steele, perhaps on his wedding day to his second wife. This is a picture of his second wife, Sarah. Sadie was her nickname, taken on their wedding night. with her white gown, white shoes, white dress. Yeah. That's their son, Marion Francis. Well, there are a lot of pictures of him, just one of them. And my final few photographs are showing the artistry. Steele considered himself an artist. And several times he talks about being a photo tourist artist or something like that. He considered his work artistic. He didn't think of it for the documentary value. That's great value today, but he saw it as artistic. And when we had Larry Sporm look at these photos and write up a presentation on his artistry, these are some of the photos we picked out to illustrate that. This picture has always intrigued me because of the cattle in it. They're just standing there. My own experience in doctoring cattle out in the pasture, roping cattle out in the pasture is, you go to chasing one, the others are going to scatter. But they got this one right here nice and close to the herd. Now, did they rope it over here somewhere and drag it out there? I don't know. Or did they get a rope and then they drove the cattle back up there? I'm not sure either. But Larry talked about the composition, the artistic eye that composed this photograph. It's anchored in the back. You can barely see it perhaps by a windmill. Got this herd of cattle here in the midground. And in the foreground, you have a man in light-colored clothing on a dark horse. And in the back over here, you got a man in dark clothing on a white horse. The only white animal in the herd is that one. Did Steele have them rope this white one on purpose and do this? I don't know. It shows how you would brand an animal out in the open. You'd head it, you'd heel it. We don't see the branding fire, and I don't see any smoke arising, so maybe it's just sticking a cold iron on there to kind of show how it would happen, but it's a very nicely composed artistic photograph. This one again is in Beaver County, a sod house with the mother standing here, the dog there, some clothes on the line, hand dug well, the sister pulling up water from that well, pouring it in this hollowed out log water trough, and her little brother sitting on the horse with a drink. Nice picture, but what Larry saw with his photographer's eye was how the boy is bent over in exactly the same angle as that leaning over tree. Now, did he pose that picture? Did he just happen to catch it then? I don't know, but that's Larry said, a good photographer will, if he doesn't set up the picture, he's just got that instinct to snap it at the right time. That's apparently one of those two things happened here. Remember that picture there with the white cow, the only white cow in the herd when they rope. Well, here they've got a corral full of horses and mules, and you can see how they've got arranged here, because these mules are tied up to a post, and that shows that horse there. So you've got the white animals tied up here at the front, with the dark ones in the background. Very carefully set up. But how in the world did he get a turkey to stand in front and another in back, and all the other turkeys in between? I don't know. But it's a nice photo. Larry Sporm said these photos reminded him of Monet's haystacks, which were being painted at about the same time in France. He said it was Steele actually influenced by Monet? Probably not. Could have been, doesn't know. But at least he had that same kind of eye to kind of capture that look of those wheat stacks. And he got some other photos of wheat stacks without the horse and people in there, and he's got some, just kind of start here close up and then just sort of go off into infinity there. And there he is as an old man. So you've seen him young and middle, and then as an older man. In 1935, he, as I said, and his wife Sadie decide to move back to Kansas from McCook, Nebraska. They make arrangements with Boot Hill Museum They'll set up a wagon, a chuck wagon there. They will have cowboy artifacts in it and photos to show. And he will also go out to schools in the area and give programs, cowboy programs. This is in the summer of 1935. They are living in rented rooms in Dodge City, getting all this prepared for the next season. Next spring they'll open up and do all this. Well, on January the 2nd, I believe it is, Steele's wife, Sadie, is not feeling well. She stays in bed. He gets up, goes out to the kitchen to fix breakfast. He turns on the coffee pot and goes back in to check on her. The coffee boils over, puts out the gas fire. They asphyxiate. Both of them asphyxiate. They are buried in the Mullenville Cemetery, both of them. We visited the graves there. Apparently there was a storefront that had a number of his photographs in it. The time he died, a few days later they were gone. No one knows who got them and where. Anyway. As I said earlier, Steele probably took 1 million photographs in his lifetime, hundreds of thousands at least. We have located and digitized. You can see them through the Center for Great Plains Studies website. If you get on our website at Emporia State University, Google Emporia State University, go to the Center for Great Plains Studies, go to FM Steele, and you can see these photographs online. Or you can go to Kansas Memory at the Kansas State Historical Society, because we share our photographs with them. And whoever has the photographs, keeps the photographs, we scan them, and we share those scans with the State Historical Society. And the scans are not of publishable quality, so if anyone wants to use them in publications, they will put them in touch with the people who gave us the photos, let us copy the photos, and they control the photos and the rights to them. So, your assignment is to go home and go through your attic and your spare rooms and look for those old photograph albums. And if you see anything with an FM Steele name on it, please let me know. Contact Phil here at the library and he'll get in touch with me, and we will make arrangements to, you can either email me a scan, or we'll make arrangements to scan it and add it to the collection. Be happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Yes?
What happened to the